At the door of my parents' home, my younger sister, who is 8 years younger than me, said, "I can't put anything from someone else in my mouth because it's scary." I had come to celebrate my sister's birthday at my parents' house. I brought her a birthday cake, and she grabbed it. When the still-wrapped cake struck me, it horribly distorted. It was unbelievable to me that this was taking place. Behind my sister, my parents were laughing and holding their tummies while they saw me covered in cake crumbs. I was surprised and shocked by what had happened. Like my sister, I was treated like a stranger by my breathless parents. The reason for this is that your last name has changed. My sister stated, "We are no longer family if our last names are different." Because I adopted my husband's last name, I never imagined that I would be viewed as a stranger. My parents gave me a startled expression and then started laughing again when I asked them questions. Didn't Kate seem like a housekeeping pro from the start? A cute child has always been our goal. Unfortunately, your inherent ugliness is your responsibility. I could feel icy air seeping into my heart. Nowadays, a lady who marries into a different family is viewed as an outsider. My sister contradicted herself by saying, "I'll take just this," and then grabbing the gift I had brought. As if shooing an animal, my mother waved me away and continued, "We plan to celebrate with family only, so please leave if you are an outsider." I granted the request of the family. I then said that I would no longer be providing financial assistance. My sister and dad dismissed it as a joke, but I had wanted to see even a glimmer of concern. After a month, the family, whom I no longer knew, angrily screamed, "What's going on?" Described the circumstances. Kate is my name. I attended a public university at the age of 28 after maintaining stellar grades throughout elementary and high school. I was successful in landing a position at a reasonably well-known corporation after graduating. Although I may seem to have had an easy life, I had a rough upbringing. I believed that we were a typical family, albeit not affluent, until the second grade. My life was drastically altered with the arrival of my younger sister, Abby, who is 8 years younger than I am. My parents were ecstatic with their new baby and started spoiling her, progressively ignoring me. Being ignored might have been better, but busy as they were, my parents started dumping all the household chores on me. This phenomenon is known as young carer, where children under 18 regularly handle household chores, family care, and caregiving that should be done by adults. When I first heard this term, I thought it perfectly described my situation. As soon as my mother brought Abby home, she yelled at me while I still had my school bag on. "Kate, get dinner ready as soon as you get home. Your usual cooking is so tasteless. Put more effort into it." I had never been taught how to cook by my mother and hadn't even taken cooking classes at school yet. Knowing that saying it was impossible would only lead to scolding, I studied beginners' cookbooks I found in the library. I vividly remember being reprimanded by my parents when eggshells ended up in my first attempt at scrambling eggs. I was also criticized for the meals being too simple, but that was the best I could do at the time. Using ready-made and frozen meals, I somehow managed to provide decent meals, albeit continuously facing criticism. Now, as an adult, I question the dangers of letting a child cook alone. The toilet is dirty. "You're old enough to clean properly now." My father would scold me harshly whenever he found even a minor speck of dirt. General housekeeping, especially cooking, cleaning, and laundry, was my responsibility. Every morning before going to school, I would hang the laundry, and after returning, I would take it in. If it rained, it was my fault for not checking the weather forecast. Despite not being allowed to watch TV, I wondered how I was supposed to check the weather. This clearly went beyond normal chores for a child. Now I understand how abnormal it was. But back then, it was considered normal, and I never questioned it. While doing the housework and envying my pampered sister, I often wished I could be like her. In that environment, I was always thinking about how to avoid being scolded and praised by my parents. As a result, I honed my housekeeping skills and was able to achieve top academic grades. However, no matter how perfectly I did the chores or excelled in my studies, I never received a word of praise from my parents. Even when I became able to cook delicious meals, I was criticized. You finally managed to make a decent meal. You really are clumsy. Even scoring full marks on a test was met with sarcasm. A smart woman is not attractive. During my last summer vacation in elementary school, my independent research was selected to represent my school at a national contest. I was excited to please my parents in a field other than housework or academics, and eagerly reported it to them. However, they scolded me. "What? You were wasting time on a research project. If you had that much time, couldn't you have cleaned the house and helped your parents more?" By the time I graduated from middle school, I had given up on expecting praise or kind words from my parents. I simply aimed to live my days without being scolded or criticized. Seeing this, Abby gradually began to look down on me. Even as I hoped to attend university, she mocked me. "You, who are bad at studying, going to university? Don't make me laugh." I thought to myself that I didn't want to be told that by someone who scored 60 points at best in elementary school tests, but I never argued back. If I did, it was clear that I would face severe reprimands from my already strict parents. University costs money, you know. We'll be in trouble if you don't work and bring money home. You understand our financial situation is tough, right? It's financially impossible for you to pursue higher education. Of course, my parents strongly opposed my continuing education. If I can't get into a state university, I'll give up. But if I can get in, I can manage the tuition myself. So please allow me to go, I pleaded and finally got permission. Life after enrolling was even more difficult. Far from helping with tuition, my parents even tried to burden me with household expenses, despite knowing that the money I earned from part-time jobs went to my tuition. They coldly said, "Since you wanted to study further, it's only natural for you to support the family. If you can't manage, just quit university," they added indifferently. Afterward, I cut back on sleep to work part-time and somehow graduated from university. Because of that, I have no fond memories of my college days. I was too busy with work, household duties, and studies, unable to make even a single friend. I spent my days far from the ideal campus life I had imagined. In my family home, I felt unloved, had no friends, and harbored fears of living my life needed by no one. During this time, I met someone at work who was the first to say he liked me, warming my heart. He was my senior, Brian, who was in charge of my training. After dating for about 2 years, we got married when I was 26. Initially, my parents strongly opposed it, but I somehow persuaded them. Now I live with Brian, who has become my husband. 2 years after our marriage, I usually kept my distance from my family home, but decided to visit after a long time for my sister's birthday. I pressed the intercom at my parents' house, holding a birthday cake and a gift. "Who is it?" My sister responded jokingly. "Stop joking. I brought a cake and a gift, so open up quickly," I replied. Then my sister burst out of the entrance, forcefully snatched the cake box from my hand, and threw it at me. While I gasped in a small voice, she said, "I can't put anything in my mouth that someone else has brought because it's scary." The cake hit me, losing its shape. Behind my sister, my parents were holding their bellies, laughing at me, covered in cake debris. "Look at that stranger," they mocked. I just stood there, dumbfounded by the shocking scene. My parents were laughing so hard they could barely breathe. It's because your last name has changed. Having a different last name means we're no longer family. My sister joined in, alienating me further. I never thought about being treated as a stranger just because I took my husband's last name. Am I no longer family? I asked. My parents looked confused for a moment, but soon insulted me again while laughing. Kate was always like a professional in housekeeping, wasn't she? We always wanted a cute child. Unfortunately, it's your fault for being born ugly. I felt a cold wind blow through my heart at that moment. Perhaps then, any remaining affection I had for my family disappeared. My once feared parents now appeared as nothing more than pitiful, ridiculous adults. A woman who marries and goes to another family is a stranger now, they added. Despite those words, my sister grabbed the gift I had, saying, "I'll only take this," contradicting herself. Echoing those words, my mother said, "We intend to celebrate only with family, so please leave if you are an outsider," waving her hand as if shooing an animal. Am I no longer family? I asked again, and my father jokingly shrugged. Who are you? I don't understand what you're saying. For 20 years since my sister was born, I couldn't understand why I had lived trying to please such unreasonable parents. Despite having the freedom to leave, I felt pathetic for staying in such a home for so long. It was as if I had been brainwashed, though I never received official treatment. Eventually, I decided to comply with my parents' and sister's wishes. Then from now on, let's treat each other as strangers, I said, deciding to sever ties. They happily high-fived each other. Therefore, I will end my remittances. Please take note, I declared politely, greeting them and leaving the place. The three of them hurled insults and laughter at my back, but I did not look back. She's talking about remittances as if she's ever done that. What a liar. A young housewife can't afford to make remittances, right? It's pathetic to lie when you're in trouble. Liar, that's why you were never loved by dad or mom. Seeing that I wasn't looking back, they continued to hurl childish insults until I was out of sight. Stupid woman. She's too scared to look back. How embarrassing. And don't ever come back. I felt completely lighthearted. For years, I had sought affection from my family, but now that I was freed from them, I couldn't understand why their love had been so necessary. Now Brian, who always praises me despite my low self-esteem and offers unconditional love, is waiting for me at home. After washing off the cake from my clothes at a park faucet, I hurried home. Surprised to see me dirty, my husband still smiled kindly. Without asking anything, he simply urged me to take a bath immediately. His kindness in not pursuing any questions until I chose to speak struck me anew. Later, my former family, now strangers, appeared at our home, shouting angrily. What's going on? Explain the situation. My mother screamed. The sound of pounding on the front door echoed. After that incident, Brian had told me not to interact with them anymore. But seeing that they weren't giving up, I reluctantly opened the door. It must be something you've done, Kate, they claimed. What are you talking about? I genuinely couldn't understand. It was natural, given that they yelled without explaining anything. My tuition hasn't been paid, my sister complained. She attends a well-known private university with high prestige. Unlike me, she never had to help at home or work part-time. With moderate effort, she was allowed to attend tutoring. How does that mean I did something wrong? I continued the conversation calmly. Regarding that matter, university tuition was usually paid from a household account in my father's name. My parents managed the account, and I didn't know the PIN, so it was impossible for me to be involved in the payments. However, I had some guesses about the real reason the payments stopped. Before I got married, I used to deposit $500 monthly into that account. This amount didn't include food expenses, and I was continually told Kate should pay for the food since she does the cooking. Covering the food costs for 4 people with my own money, I might have been spending nearly $1,000 a month. When I decided to get married, my parents opposed it. They said, "What if we lose the person who does the chores?" And complained, "Do you think I can work and do the housework? What if I collapse?" What a heartless daughter. They showed reluctance toward my marriage. I managed to get their approval by agreeing to double the remittance. It seems my parents had completely forgotten about that promise. However, it's strange that they're running out of money, even though they're living the same way as before. I decided to confront my parents with reality. Isn't it because the remittance from your daughter, who is now a stranger to you, has stopped? I asked. My parents and sister showed expressions of astonishment and began to look unsettled. "What do you mean? Dad, weren't you earning something on the side?" My mother asked my father. "No way. Side jobs are prohibited at my workplace," he replied. "I thought Abby was earning something from a job," my father added. "Did you both forget having told me I didn't need to work?" Abby retorted. It seems my mother mistook my remittances for my father's earnings, and he thought they were Abby's part-time income. Even more shocking facts came to light. "But it's okay because I'm getting money from Grandpa for tuition," Abby said. I was astonished to hear this. Despite my grandfather supporting Abby's tuition, they were still demanding money from me. My mother accidentally revealed the truth and continued talking. She had received money for tuition from my grandfather, but had spent it all on branded goods and needed additional funds. Abby and my father blamed my mother, and soon an argument broke out. But it was short-lived. My parents and sister suddenly smiled at me. I once deeply desired such smiles from my family. But now, after cutting ties with them, their smiles only felt unpleasant. Kate is different from Abby. She graduated from a state university. She's indeed my child. It was worth raising her strictly. That's our Kate, my parents said, completely changing their attitude and trying to win me over. It seems they finally understood that a substantial amount of money was needed for tuition. They dared to say such things without even knowing what kind of company I work for. I have realized my childhood dream and work for a major pharmaceutical company, which allows me to earn a higher salary than the average woman. Sending $1,000 a month home was never impossible for me. However, there were tough periods when I had to juggle multiple jobs to send money home. Seeing me dealing with my parents and sister at the entrance, my husband suddenly opened the door with force. "Enough. Kate is not your convenient tool," my husband shouted. My parents flinched for a moment, but quickly retorted. "What kind of language are you using to your in-laws?" My father exclaimed. "Absolutely disgraceful. Such behavior is unacceptable," my mother added angrily, with my sister nodding in agreement behind them. "My wife is not just a wallet to you. You're the ones who cut ties. We have no further business with people like you. Get out," my husband declared. Overwhelmed by his stern words, my parents left quietly. About my tuition," Abby murmured. It seemed she was preoccupied with her own issues. "Anything else?" my husband pressed. With a small scream of "eek," Abby also retreated with the family. However, we didn't think they would give up so easily. They continued to come to our house and called frequently from the next day. I consistently ignored these attempts. But eventually, Abby began to obstruct my way. One day, seeing Abby in front of the entrance, I entered the house through the back door and spent time at a cafe to avoid her. But today, I was spotted by Abby and couldn't escape. She approached me at a quick pace. I intended to ignore whatever she said, but I was surprised by her words and involuntarily stopped. I've always thought I was wrong. I'm sorry, my sister, who had always treated me as a stranger, suddenly apologized. Mom and Dad said you were a failure, so I misunderstood you. I'm really sorry, she added. Her apology sounded strange to me and gave me goosebumps. So, I at least want you to provide for my tuition, she concluded. I didn't think she was remorseful, but her blatant request for financial support was hard to accept. Ignoring her words, I hurried home. As I did, my sister threw words of blame from behind. How narrow-minded can you be? Not forgiving your sister even when she apologizes. Her voice was loud enough to echo in the neighborhood. Perhaps she was trying to embarrass me to elicit action, but I continued to ignore her and walked on. Ah, you're ignoring me. You've grown up a lot. Then I'll wreck your house. Enraged, my sister intensified her threats. Better watch your way home. My friends are quick with their hands. Her voice grew even harsher as I closed the front door. My sister began to pound on it violently. Honestly, I was quite scared. My sister is an adult and has a better build than me. I trembled with fear, wondering what I would do if she really attacked me. However, my sister soon had to speak to the police. Thanks to her loud talking, someone in the neighborhood had called them. I explained the situation to the arriving officers, and the incident escalated. Neighbors also came out, concerned, and the scene became tumultuous. Although my sister was taken to the police station, she was not punished as she hadn't committed any violence. The threats were there, but it was ultimately seen as a sibling quarrel. When my parents came to take responsibility for my sister, they came to my house and further escalated the situation. You're her sister. Why did you report her to the police? This is unacceptable, my parents exclaimed. Don't you have any affection for your sister? It's unbelievable that you would do something that could have a significant impact on her future, my mother criticized. My parents continued loudly enough for the whole neighborhood to hear. Worried about a potential call to the police, a patrolling officer luckily noticed them first. He cautioned them and forced them to return home. I watched this scene from the window. After my parents disappeared from view, I stepped outside. The officer informed me they were strengthening patrols in the area. Though they couldn't intervene directly in domestic issues, the officer said with a wry smile, "It's better to act before things escalate further." It was reassuring, but the police wouldn't always be there to watch over us. There was still a chance that my family might come when they were not around, so we needed to take swift action. In reality, my parents and sister continued to show up nearly every day at our home, demanding financial support for living expenses and tuition. Although we ignored them, they would cause a scene at the front door, and the police had to reprimand them multiple times. Initially, our neighbors were concerned, but they started to show signs of annoyance as the disturbances continued. My husband and I apologized to them repeatedly and mentioned that we were planning to move. When asked about our new address, we carefully avoided answering those questions to prevent my family from causing trouble for others. We kept our new address as confidential as possible. The neighbors, with troubled smiles, showed understanding, acknowledging the inevitability of the situation. My husband and I eventually relocated without informing our family or even the local residents of our new address. According to a neighbor we happened to meet in the city, my parents and sister continued to visit our old home even after we moved. They refused to believe the explanation that we had relocated, leading to disputes with the new residents. Eventually, a settlement had to be paid, and after that, we no longer saw them around. However, we were warned to remain cautious. Following local advice, my parents and sister showed up at my husband's parents' house. "Where has Kate moved?" "Because of her, we had to move into a cheap apartment," my father exclaimed. "Her actions have ruined our lives." "Tell us where she is," my mother demanded. This was a great inconvenience for my in-laws. Before we got married, I had told them about my past, the treatment I received from my family, and the potential troubles they might cause in the future. Despite his parents' objections, my husband had decided to marry me. However, I thought we shouldn't proceed without his parents' approval. Although I braced for opposition, my mother-in-law, with tears streaming down her face, embraced me and said, "You've been through so much. Now that you're married to Brian, I'm your mother, so it's all right." I couldn't hold back my tears. Even though I was alienated by my parents and sister, the warm support from my in-laws prevented me from being deeply hurt. Fully understanding my background, my in-laws firmly rejected my parents' demands. Why should we inform outsiders about our daughter-in-law's whereabouts? They stated. Nevertheless, my parents and sister showed no signs of giving up. "Give us back our daughter. We cannot allow only you to benefit from our daughter," my father shouted. "My daughter earns money, and your son is after her money too," my mother said accusingly. At this, my normally calm father-in-law grew angry. "Enough. Kate is now our daughter. You were the ones who disowned her," he stated forcefully. Chastised by my father-in-law, my parents fell silent. "Ultimately, it's you who rely on your daughter's income. We have never expected a penny from her earnings," he continued. My mother tried to justify that since my remittances stopped, they had fallen into financial difficulty and had been reckless with spending. "That's your responsibility. You decided to treat her as an outsider, so please leave." My mother-in-law dismissed them. Then my sister pleaded for at least continued support until she graduated from college, but my in-laws, knowing I had completed my studies independently, looked at her coldly. Our daughter graduated from university on her own. She fulfilled her role as the successor without parental support, so it's only natural to expect the same from you. My sister blushed in response to the irony. Despite this, my parents and sister insisted on staying until they got the information they wanted, but finally left when my in-laws threatened to call the police. I am deeply grateful to my in-laws. After that, due to financial difficulties, the relationship between my parents and sister rapidly deteriorated. My father, already a heavy smoker, increased his smoking, which led to lung disease. Due to excessive spending, my mother began depending on alcohol and developed hypertension and liver disease. As medical expenses piled up, my sister refused any assistance and continued to blame our parents. The deteriorating relationship between my parents and sister led to constant quarrels, and eventually they reached a breaking point. My father and mother kicked my sister out of the house. My sister tried to return home, but my mother rejected her, saying, "I cannot have a daughter who doesn't care about her parents' illnesses to look after us." I know all this because they took turns showing up at my in-laws' house, blaming the other two, justifying themselves, and seeking help. They have been asking my in-laws to contact me. In each case, my in-laws have firmly refused. Feeling that I could not continue to burden my in-laws, I considered planning a countermeasure. When my parents and sister visited my in-laws' house together, knowing it would cause tremendous inconvenience, they began crying loudly and started an emotional appeal at the entrance. Probably to elicit sympathy from the neighbors, they wanted to show how terribly ungrateful it was not to forgive someone who was apologizing so earnestly. This behavior, likely learned from having the police called at their previous home, was a misguided lesson. They should have learned not to cause inconvenience to others, not to switch tactics from causing a disturbance to emotional appeals. "Please stop." I finally could not endure it and raised my voice. Unable to bear their clumsy acting, I yelled at my parents and sister, who were sitting at the entrance. In fact, the place my husband and I had moved to was my in-laws' house. I was there because I knew about the repeated inconveniences caused to my in-laws by my parents and sister. "Kate, were you being held captive here?" My father grabbed my shoulder and threw an unfounded suspicion at me. "We were worried because we couldn't contact you." My mother followed, trying to approach me. It was clear my parents thought that if they acted kindly, I would comply with them again. I brushed off their hands. "I have a loving husband and understanding in-laws, so I don't need concern from strangers," I declared. This was not a physical push, but a firm rejection of their behavior. "What happened? Were you brainwashed?" My father gripped my shoulder firmly. My mother, reaching for my face with concern, asked, "Did you receive terrible treatment? Won't you come back home? Let's live as a family of four again." Abby asked me with a friendly smile, pleading for me to return. The way they insinuated that my in-laws had treated me poorly infuriated me. "Yes, I was treated horribly, and maybe I was brainwashed," I said. Then it seemed like she was about to say something, but I interrupted my mother. "By you guys." I deliberately raised my voice, starting to recount each instance of how my family had treated me. My mother panicked, trying to stop me, and Abby became flustered, glancing around. At that moment, my father shouted, "Enough already," and waved his hand. Suddenly, a loud whistle sounded. At my husband's request, police officers had rushed over. My parents and Abby tried to dismiss it as just a minor domestic spat, saying, "Sorry, we were too harsh, and I neglected my sister too much. We are family, after all." Using emotion and kinship as shields to seek support, it was clear to me my parents and Abby only cared about money, and their apologies were merely an act. In the past, I might have easily forgiven such apologies, but having learned what true affection is from my husband and in-laws, I now understand that this is not genuine love. "It was you who first threw the cake and called me a stranger, right?" "It was Abby who threw the cake," I said. "Abby is cold because she doesn't even care about her parents' illness," my father retorted. The moment my father disowned the sister he once doted upon triggered a dispute among the three, with them arguing, "You were the ones who said to kick her out," and I never said that. This commotion seemed like a typical scene for my parents and sister, even leading to a physical altercation in front of the police officers. When the police officer tried to intervene, unfortunately, his cheek was struck. Initially hesitant to get involved in a domestic issue, the officer could no longer overlook the situation. Though it was an accidental strike and did not constitute obstruction of justice, it was a situation that could not be ignored. While the officer was sternly warning the family, it appeared he was receiving some communication via his radio. Afterward, he sighed deeply and requested that my parents and Abby voluntarily accompany him. It seems that a neighbor aware of the situation had called the police. The reported issues included loud disturbances and threatening behavior. Even though it was accidental, my parents and Abby, feeling guilty about striking the officer, complied with his request to accompany him. As they were being placed into the police vehicle, I told them my husband and I, along with my in-laws, have decided to move away from this place, so coming here any further is pointless. Abby and my parents tried to hold on to me, but the policemen had already put them in the car. I showed up in front of my family because we were relocating because my spouse was being transferred. As she said, "No need to worry now," my mother-in-law gave me a soft slap on the back. After I told my husband, who had always objected to me standing in front of my family. I thought I was going to get an ulcer. He suddenly understood and backed my choice to sever all relationships. My father-in-law just gave me a warm grin and a nod. I felt my warm family's presence quite strongly. It appears that the police gave my parents and Abby a severe warning, but they believe that prison life would be more comfortable than the difficult existence they currently lead. My parents' illnesses prevented them from getting the care they needed and forced them to resign from their employment. Additionally, our grandparents' tuition help for Abby was discontinued. Abby was dismissed from university for not paying her tuition and not fulfilling her promise of an extension, leaving her without someone to turn to. Abby accepted a job at a casino with a dorm in the country after being evicted from her father's home since it paid well. She soon developed a gambling addiction, though, and began spending the majority of her earnings on it. My spouse and I are concentrating on our work while creating a happy life in our new house. Discussions about living together are moving forward, and we keep a healthy distance from my in-laws, who reside nearby. We are making decisions that prioritize our careers and families. My in-laws and I are combining our money to build a duplex house that should be finished in a year or so. We intend to lead a happy life as a family of 5 after that.